Well, brothers, thank you for joining Alexandria-Washington September 15th Esoteric Corner. Today we have Worshipful Brother Adam Goldman here to present to us. He'll be filling our minds with the knowledge on astronomical astrological origins of the Laudable Fraternity of the Most Honorable Order of the Rosy Cross. Worshipful Adam, we'd like to take it away.
All right. So as Rob said, this presentation is called Astronomical and Astrological Origins of the Laudable Fraternity of the Most Honorable Order of the Rosy Cross. It's a very long title, and it's tongue-in-cheek because it's based on the Rosicrucian manifestos, and I believe I got this title other than the Astronomical and Astrological Origins. Is probably from the fame of the fraternity of the Laudable, probably the Confessions of the Fraternity. Called the Confessio Fraternitatis, or the second Rosicrucian manifesto that showed up in Europe in the early 1600s. So tonight we're going to be going over some of the interesting connections, we'll say, of both the origins of the Rosicrucians. We're going to go a bit through their story. We're going to look at some of their symbolism and what does it mean to us as Freemasons. And so around the 1600s, when we had a series of manifestos show up in Europe, as I said, the first one was called The Fame of the Fraternity, or the Fama Fraternitatis. Then next one was the Confessions of the Fraternity. I think the first one was 1604. The second one was a couple years after. The Confessions of the Fraternity, or Confessio Fraternitatis. And then there was a long break, and then a third and final manifesto came out called The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, which we're not going to get into here because it doesn't really follow the same, we'll say, it doesn't feel like it was written by the same authors. And so there's a lot of separate discussions that can be had around the chemical wedding, but for today's purposes, we'll focus on the Fama and the Confessios. Anyway, so here's a Rosicrucian plate that we've probably seen as Freemasons. I mean, it's used quite a bit. And interestingly, we see certain things in here that we recognize. Here's Occident, which is the East, and we see many other, interesting elements. So here is the Ark of the Covenant, the anomaly at Ararat, or Noah's Ark. But in the foreground, what we have is this kind of college, and it's a college on wheels, which is interesting. And by the way, Rob, can you see my pointer when I point?
We can, yes.
Okay, good. All right, so you have this college on wheels, which is very interesting. So it's obviously an allegory for like a moving society or a moving college, right? That's not unlike a traditional university of Europe. Is not confined to any single location. And we see, let me put on my glasses here, we see, Jesus Nobis Omnia, showing that it has a semi-Christian origin, but it also tells you that it has something quite Kabbalistic about it, because it has what we call tetragrammaton up here, or the four-lettered name of God. And so and this is the East, Orient, and Occident is the West. We also find here some interesting symbolism around these wings, and these wings we'll get into further in the presentation, but sometimes associated Kabbalistically and hermetically with the Holy Spirit. And then other than these, like for today's purposes, the last couple of things I'd highlight on this first slide is a lot of us would just overlook this guy that has like a snake floaty that says 1604 next to it, and then this swan over here, both associated with a particular star. And both of the energies of those stars is going through these animals / animal mans, and they're shining brightly upon not only the bell, but the fraternity. And through it, we have this ribbon that says Fama, or fame, or the first part of the first manifesto, the Fame of the Fraternity, referring to the Order of the Rosy Cross. And so in the early 1600s, all of a sudden there was these pamphlets that started showing up, and one of them read, "We deputies of the Principal College of the Brethren of the Rosy Cross are staying visibly and invisibly within this town by the grace of the Most High, to whom the heart of the just turns. We show and teach without books or mass how to speak the language of every country where we wish to be, to bring our fellow men out of the error of death." And so you can imagine that this showing up in a very Roman Catholic country was troubling for the rulers of those countries, right? We're talking about Germany, France, throughout those areas. These were showing up and creating a lot of issues for the people that were ruling those countries in those areas. And so part of what we see is a I don't know, there's a romanticizing, because this is, around the period of the Enlightenment, and there's a romanticizing. Everybody has been going through, as we'll see, through a lot of war and conflict, and this is, shortly after the plague ended, and so there's a lot of talk. This is before television, obviously, and so this is the talk of the town, literally. And one of the poems that came out said, "For what we do presage is not in gras, for we are the brethren of the Rosy Cross. We have the Mason word and second sight. Things for to come we can foretell aright." And so this is very interesting, because this kind of gets at the heart of partly what the Rosicrucians were known to be able to do. So for what we do presage is an old word to say predict, is not in gras. So like what we predict isn't hyperbole, and it's not to be taken for granted, because we are the Rosicrucians, more or less, the brethren of the Rosy Cross. And interesting, they have this secret Mason's word, maybe connected to the lost word of Freemasonry, and the second sight. In other words, they're able to see more than most folks are, and they're able to make predictions with whatever these Mason words and second sight techniques they're using. And so people are trying to seek them out. It's one of the stories is that one of the first people that seeks them out when these pamphlets start showing up was a lawyer that owed a bunch of money, and he wanted to use the techniques of the Rosicrucians, of course, to make money. And they made him a fool of him, because he wasn't seeking them for pure reasons. But if we think about the times in which they lived, this is really the time in which the Roman Catholic and the Protestant worlds were really just warring nonstop. And so if you happen to be Protestant, Lutheran, you were seeing a lot of death and destruction around this time. So in 1600, we have Giudardo Bruno burned at the stake for theorizing the universe was infinite and advocating a Hermetic doctrine still being biblical. In 1605, you have the Guy Fawkes incident and the gunpowder plot to destroy to destroy the Parliament. 1608, you have the death of Duke Frederick of Württemberg, which will become important later on in this story. And then in 1610, the death of Henry IV of France, who was killed by a Roman Catholic fanatic. 1618 through 48, you have the 30 Years' War of the Protestants versus the Catholics. And then in 1619, the Winter Queen Elizabeth and Frederick V were deposed. And then in 1633 through 42, Galileo was put on house arrest for supporting the Copernican theories. And so all of this among plagues and droughts. And so lay people were looking for answers, and where else would you look but to the Bible? And so at this time, that's what the Protestant Reformation was over, right? In order to be able to read the Word of God for yourself. And so even though there weren't a lot of people able to read at this time. We're talking about a more aristocratic class that was likely able to read at least the Latin that a lot of this was translated into, and then their European tongues. So it said, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons. So stop. So people are reading this in Genesis 1:14, and they're thinking, well, the Rosicrucians are saying that they're able to make predictions based on essentially what it says they should be able to do right here in Genesis 1:14, because God put the lights there in the firmament for signs and for seasons. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also, right? And so we know that from Masonic ritual, right? As the sun rules the day and the moon governs the night, right? So there's allusions already from this Old Testament, which is the volume of Sacred Law, which is part and parcel of every Masonic lodge. We see that this poem of the Rosicrucians saying that, hey, we're not boasting, we can do these things based on our knowledge of astrology. Now this is saying that the stars were put there for prediction in the first place, more or less. And I'll just, while I'm thinking about it, think about the fact that there is a square and a compass over your volume of the Sacred Law, and the square and the compass is necessary in order to erect these ancient charts. So among all of that chaos, death and destruction and famine and plagues, so all of a sudden this guy comes out, Simon Studion, and in 1604 he comes out with this book, Neometria. Neometria means the measurement of the temple. Again, Masons, our ears should perk up. And so measurement of the temple is a book that essentially, it's an over 1,000-page book in 1604. Comes out of Württemberg, which is where Studion's from. And it is an exhaustive, going back to my prior point about the square and compasses being above the volume of the Sacred Law, it is an exhaustive study of the volume of the Sacred Law. Oh, and by the way, look at the square and compasses. It's an exhaustive study of the volume of the Sacred Law through numerology, gematria, Kabbalah, Hermetic teachings, and he basically comes up with a series of predictions, very Nostradamus-like predictions, but they're, remember, these are Protestants, and to them, the Pope is the Antichrist, which is a lot about what the Confessio Fraternitatis, the Second Manifesto, is about. And so what Studion's Neometria is about is saying that, hey, I know we're going through these incredibly tough times, and our, like Bob Marley said, how long can they kill our prophets before we stand aside? This is essentially what he's saying is like, our prophets are dying, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. I've done the calculations, and the Antichrist, he's referencing the Pope, would be dead within a few years. I think from this point, 1604, if I'm not mistaken, he pictured sometime in the 1620s. And but along with that was a series of other predictions all throughout the remaining till the end of the world, right? The Bible talks about the beginning, and it takes us up to his present day, 1604, when this comes out. And then he makes predictions based on the codes, the gematria and Kabbalistic codes hidden within the text through the end of the world. And so he bases a lot of it, though, on, oh, sorry, hold on one second. So here's a couple of quotes. Using serious calculations, Simon Studion wanted to prophesize all the important events of the future till the end of the world. A feeling of great excitement and change on the horizon was felt and was indeed very prevalent in Europe at that time, and especially regarding the awakening within the landscape of the mind. And so it really was this, it reminds me of that saying, although I found later, unfortunately, it's not true, that they attribute to Kennedy that said, the Chinese character for danger is made up of two other characters, crisis and opportunity. I've heard that that's not actually what that character says, but anyway, that's what it is. You essentially, in astrology, which is what this is pointing to, is it's not necessarily going to be a negative time, a positive time. It's a potential energy that is being referenced here, and there's hope that it could be leveraged for the good. At the same time, the Holy Roman Inquisition wanted to leverage it for something else. So these signs in the heavens that we learned from Genesis 1:14 through 17 started appearing in 1572. And in 1572, Tycho Brahe was a court astrologer and mathematician. And by the way, think back to your trivium and quadrivium. So this is so this court astrologer sees this called the new star, or the Stella Nova, appear in 1572, and so this is above Europe. Everybody sees this new star that shows up, and it just, can you imagine if there was a star in the sky that showed up right now that was so bright it looked like almost a second sun? Not quite as powerful, but certainly more powerful than Venus or Mars or anything else that you could see with the naked eye. It was something that was so bright that it really appeared to be a minor sun around that time. And so because there was no distinction between astronomy and astrology for the mathematicians of the time, every mathematician was expected to make calculations and was supposed to make predictions based on those calculations. And so that's the first, that was the first one that shows up in 1572. In 1600, a second star shows up in the constellation Cygnus, which is the swan. And by the way, when you think of the Rosicrucian Scottish Rite symbolism of the pelican, it's not apples to apples, but a lot of times you'll see that, in America, for example, we ended up adopting the bald eagle when Franklin wanted the wild turkey. So it doesn't have to be apples to apples, because both of them were placeholders symbolizing the phoenix rising from the ashes. So the majesty of the turkey or the whatever, the bald eagle, were both just representations of the phoenix all along anyway. So you might see similarity, might not. Just collect these as data points as we go through them and try and just prove our hypothesis here. All right, so two stars show up, much like the Rosicrucians said, hey, we make predictions based on that. Simon Studion's book also says that there are these signs in the heavens that are spoken about in Genesis that are foretelling this kind of downfall of the Antichrist. So then Johannes Kepler had been summoned to Prague to be an understudy to Tycho Brahe, who dies in 1601. Kepler becomes the mathematician for Frederick, and he sees this other large event in the sky, which was a supernova of 1604, or the new star of, I think it's a supernova though, this one. And so now you have this third event in 1604. So now pause and think about everything up to this point, right? So from the 1500s up to 1604, you've had, you have this whole crisis and chaos, but also hope at the same time, and people looking for signs, and the signs keep appearing one after the other. And then the same year that this last sign appears, then the Neometria book comes out, which is still unpublished, but it was in pamphlet form. And so people were getting copies of that, or at least talking about it. And so it was really leading to an excitement, like the tide is about to turn. So also in 1604, not only do you have Johannes Kepler's final star that we're going to talk about, or supernova, that came out, and by the way, and that last one was in the constellation of Serpentaris, the serpent. And so now we think back to that first plate of the movable college on wheels, and up in the right corner you had the swan, or the star of Cygnus, and up in the right you had the man encircled with the serpent, or the star, or the supernova that showed up in Serpentaris. And so again in 1604, now all of a sudden you have these manifestos showing up in Roman Catholic countries that are saying like, this invisible college of learned men that have this secret teaching are hiding among you in plain sight. I can only imagine what this must have been like. And so hiding in plain sight among you, and so imagine in France, right, Roman Catholic France, and we are making predictions about, everything, including the downfall of the most powerful man on earth, which is largely what the Confessio Fraternitatis is about. But the Fama is more about, it's kind of giving an overview of the story of their version of what we would call the Hiramic legend, or Hiram Abiff, the legend of Hiram. They have the same thing, but their Hiram is called Christian Rosenkreuz. So Christian's life is really spelled out here, and I think I get into that in another slide. Whereas the Confessions of the fraternity is more of like their political belief structure. And again, Chemical Wedding is probably my thinking. They say this is written by Johann Valentin Andrei. I'm not so sure. I think this is a purely alchemical text. It's an allegory, and I have a different presentation on that one. So, but interestingly, we have this: if the chronology of the story is calculated, give the same date at which the tomb of Rosenkreuz is said to have been discovered. Maybe I should have told you that now. Okay. Can't remember if I'm supposed to do that now. I apologize. I'm only giving this presentation one other time. So let me just give you a quick overview, because you might need that before you hear the next slide. So the story of Christian Rosenkreuz was that he was born in 1378 in Germany, I believe. And around 4 years old, there's different versions of the story, but his parents die. And he goes to live in a monastery. He becomes, like this kind of whiz kid in the monastery, so much so that when he's still a youth, he and one of the priests are going to go on this kind of like tour of Europe, Arabia, and North Africa. And so when they set out on that journey, the priest dies, but Rosenkreuz continues on. And along his travels, he winds up in Arabia, and probably he meets like this Sufi Muslims, and he learns, I think, mathematics. He learns, I think, some astrology. And later on, he goes to Egypt. In Egypt, he learns about zoology. He's in Yemen, a place called Damkar. He learns Kabbalah and magic, I believe, either there or in Morocco, because he's in Fez. I think Fez, he learns Kabbalah and Hermetic teachings. And then, and anyway, he does this kind of like world tour, and all the adepts in these areas, they're expecting him, because, they have this second sight as well. And they give him secret teachings, which are kept from the profane. And not only that, they give him a book of secret teachings of the universe. And so it's with the teachings of this book called the Book M, he's able to really understand the movement of the planets, what they mean, how that, as above, so below, how the movement of the planets affects us on Earth, and many, many other Kabbalistic secrets, which today we might call magic. And so he goes back to Europe very excited. He can't wait to tell all the professors in the university how wrong they've had it all along. But, they talk about the, I don't know if you've ever heard of the stages of truth. The stages of truth is first is violently opposed. First is violently opposed, and then it's first it's ridiculed, then it's violently opposed, and then third is it's taken as having been self-evident all along. So he goes back and they ridicule his teachings first, but then they violently oppose it, so much so that he decides the world isn't ready for this, and he gets 7 other students. So think about apprentices in our structure, and he teaches them and says, "Hey, we're going to take this throughout Europe," and I'll get into that more. But he ends up dying, and the students inherit all of his teachings. And so with that, if the chronology of the story is calculated, give the same date at which the tomb of Christian Rosenkreuz is said to have been discovered. So he was born in 1378, like I said, and he was 106 years old when he died. And in the teachings of Rosicrucianism, they say that his tomb would lie undiscovered for 120 years. So interestingly, based on these old books written in the early 1600s that give these dates, if you sum up the 3 of them, it gives you 1604, which is the date of the supernova in Serpentaris. This is the date of the first manifesto, Fama Fraternitatis, and Simon Studion's book, right? Neometria. So really interesting, this date, 1604. And the other dates are equally interesting. I mean, the first one in 1572, the first star that was seen happened during something called the Great Conjunction. The Great Conjunction is when Jupiter and Mars, and they go through this conjunction with Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn, and usually it spells bad news when there's a great conjunction. I mean, last great conjunction we had was 2020, so that gives you an idea about the things that happen around great conjunctions. All right. So the Confessio says the Lord God hath already sent before certain messengers. So talking about these other stars, which should testify his will, to wit, it says it here, to wit, some new stars. In other words, some new stars, which do appear and are seen in the firmament in Serpentario and Cygnus, the serpent and the swan, which signify and give themselves known to everyone that they are powerful signacula or signs of great weighty matters. So in the Confessio, they're saying, hey, everyone, we're telling you the truth, and we know it because you've seen this. You saw these series of signs that have been happening that we don't normally see these supernovas above our head, let alone 3 in such a short period of time. And so when we look at like tombstones and other buildings and monuments of that time, we see that it was something that people were talking about, people were carving, right? We see that. Here's a serpent and a star here on an old tombstone. Here's the symbolism here. I think this was another tombstone. So really, when you look around the 1600s, right after the emergence of the Tycho Brahe, the Johannes Kepler, and the other supernova in Cygnus, you really see that it was something that people in Europe were talking about, and they were carving it in walls, and they were writing it in books, and they were making poems about it in artwork. So it was something that was, maybe giving hope to the people that were being oppressed so violently. And so when they're reading their scripture that says, let now the astrologers, those who prophesy by the stars, those who predict by the new moon, stand up and save you from what will come upon you. Because again, Genesis tells you that God put those things in the firmament to help us out. It's not evil. We're trying to tell you, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, there's stars above your head which will help you to weather the storm if you just take the time to pay attention, and that's what the mathematicians did in that time. And remember, if we think in the quadrivium, by the way, what is it? It starts with arithmetic, which are numbers, right? And then it goes to geometry, which is numbers in space, and then it goes to it goes to music, which is numbers in time, and then finally astronomy, which is the same as astrology, which is numbers in space-time. So basically, in space and time. So it's basically the quadrivium is telling you that you need to be able to do these astrological calculations again, and so is the square and the compasses, which are meant for drawing charts on top of your volume of the sacred law, because if you're reading the scripture as a Kabbalist or a Hermeticist, then there are things that you could predict, such as Studion's Neometria tried to do. And so I guess maybe before this might have been where I was going to tell you the story of Christian Rosenkreutz, but either way, so this is what the crypt would have looked like. So after he died, his 7 students, right? His 7 students went out throughout the world, and they and I'll get into the agreements that Father C.R. Christian Rosenkreutz made each of the 7 first students take on or bind themselves to this fraternity by. But this is what his mausoleum looked like, and it was said that there was a light that was protruding from the ceiling that was like this kind of like eerie glow, but it didn't come from any sun or electrical source. It was lined with symbols and books, and his body was untouched, and it had some big long Christian something about I can't remember what the exact text was, but there was something above the body that said something that there was no doubt that he was a Christian. It was something about Jesus. And but yeah, so here are the agreements that the followers of Christian Rosenkreutz, or the first Rosicrucians, had to bind themselves to the fraternity with. First, that none of them should profess to do anything else than to cure the sick for free. They, in Rosicrucian speak, should profess nothing other than to cure the sick, and that gratis. But basically, that's all you should ever say. Don't promise to be able to do anything else other than to be able. So that's pretty big, and so you'll find later that that's really what they became known for. I mean, the crown heads were looking for the Rosicrucians in order for their curative powers. And second, that none of them should wear any particular garb, so they shouldn't, wear like the Shaolin monk, regalia, and then try and go do judo with those guys. They're to fit in wherever they go. That on this one particular day, which we call the day C, they should meet at this kind of house of the spirit, and if they're not able to do so, send a letter. So we're not exactly sure what day C is, but you'll see I have thoughts on it. In the event of their death, every brother should always be on the lookout for the person that might succeed them. So there remains these original 7 or their successor, and that the only thing that they should be known by is this word or mark CR. So whatever this means, that's all that they're supposed to be able to recognize one another by. And then finally, that the fraternity should remain secret for 100 years. So this is after the 120 years, and they had found the body, and then they went off and they hid themselves in the world under these agreements. So interestingly, let's see where we might see this in modernity or in modern fraternities. So let's start with the first one, that they shouldn't promise to do anything but to cure the sick for free. So do we know of anyone that promises to do that, or any other groups? Well, yeah, we do. That's all that we pretty much promise to do. Here's the Masonic Medical Center of Illinois, obviously Scottish Rite. We got Reich here. We got our Shriners Hospitals. I'm an English Mason. We always donated to this thing called Air Ambulance with the square and compasses on it. Knight Templar has the Eye Foundation, etc., right? So curing the sick for free, that's kind of our thing. So what else? Okay, that none of the posterity should be constrained to wear any particular kind of clothing, but instead to fit in wherever they are. How does that fit? Well, yeah, that's kind of our thing too, right? We fit in that wherever you are here. Here's, hold on, Blaze, no, I'll take you on a minute. So here's us in Nicaragua. And you see like here, we wear in lodge it's something similar to a guayabera in Cuba, but also, in Freemasonry in Hawaii, we wear aloha shirts. Most of the time we're in these regalia, HFAF, Women Freemasons, right? They even do their thing. So yeah, fitting in, not blending in, especially, and this is only when we are together, by the way. Think about when we're outside. Like last time I was in the south of France visiting lodge that we're twinned with. And when we left lodge, we were in a town, and we had to remove any little button or identifier because it was such a Roman Catholic town that if anyone found out that the guys that were accompanying us were Freemasons, that they probably wouldn't hire them. Like the guy that was taking us around, like he installed doors, and that was his livelihood. And he's like, man, if any of the people, I mean, it's a very small town in the south of France, and we all know each other. So anyway, that's what we do. We camouflage, or we can hide ourselves in plain sight. Okay, number 3, that on this particular day, they should all meet together at the house of the Spirit, or to write the cause of his absence. So do we meet on a particular day regardless of what's going on? Well, anciently more so, but yes, we do as well. And so we have these 2 feasts that we always have to meet on, and these are very astrological. I get into this in another presentation, but here's John the Baptist, or the feast of St. John the Baptist, which happens at the end of June at the summer solstice when the sun is at meridian height. Here's St. John the Evangelist. You can tell because he has his quill and he's not next to the water like the Baptist is. And his feast is in late December, right, when the sun is at its absolute weakest, or the winter solstice, when the powers of darkness conquered the light, because the day is the shortest point of the year, conceivably, at the winter solstice, the opposite of St. John the Baptist, when you have more hours per day than any time throughout the year. And so I'd say that these are like good contenders if you're talking about people that are astrologically based in their belief structure. I believe that it would make sense to meet on one of the astrological, there's 4 main astrological times. So you have the solstices, right? The extremes of the sun's power at the strongest and its weakest, and also the equinoxes in between both, when there is an equal amount of day and night, hence equinox, equal night. And so at the vernal equinox, which is at the end of March, right, we also do certain things in various other orders. And then, but even in Scottish Rite, at the autumnal equinox, right, which happens over here in the months of September, October, we have our feast of Tishri, right? Because there's a time to reap and a time to sow. You sow your seeds over here in Nisan, March, April, or the vernal equinox, and then you reap what you sow over here in October, September of the Jewish calendar, which is why they have the Feast of Tishri there. And again, very astrological. I get into this in other presentations, but the reason why the Feast of Tishri starts off with the blowing of the ram's horn is to announce the age of Aries, the ram. Okay, number 4. Every brother should look out for a worthy person who after his decease might succeed him. So do we do that? Yeah, I mean, we're trying. We're not the best at it. I'm a demographer by training. So yeah, we are trying to do so, and I like this. I think this was out of Britain or Australia, and so in the Independent they said the older Freemasons are told to smile and stop criticizing in a bid to attract millennials, because like they're going through the same things that we are, right? Trying to recruit more, or not that we recruit, but you know what I mean, trying to entice more young members to join. And so you'll see, I think this was like Massachusetts' thing, and they got a strapping young lad instead of what most of our lodges look like. So yes, we are, but we do see that there is a drive to at least each person to replace himself. All right. And then next, the word CR should be their seal, mark, and character. This one gets interesting because what is CR? And so, I mean, sure, it is the first two letters of Christ or Christos. It is, the Rosicrucian or the Scottish Rite Rose-Croix is the R and C, CR, as is the Temple Restoration Committee of the House of the Temple. Now, interestingly, and by the way, these are the Masonic Rosicrucians. So I'm the like the master of that this year in DC, called the Celebrant. And then but this is called Cairo for our Knights Templar, right? This is, the symbol that Constantine saw and, decided to convert, because in hoc signo vinces, like in the sign you will conquer. And so there's a lot going on here, and I get into this in other presentations, but the bottom line is that this X is called Chi, and this P makes the R sound. And so together you get what's called Cairo. So the C or K sound and the R sound. So this even in itself is hiding CR, Cairo, telling you, we're told that it means Christos. Interestingly, when you add in these other two letters, alpha, which is the A sound, omega, the O sound, now you have a K sound, an R, an A, and an O, and the codes around that are worth a presentation of their own, and I have one of those. And interestingly, though, up in the upper right corner, so I don't know if I have anyone that speaks Hebrew. If there's anyone that speaks Hebrew, just yell this one out. Yell out that word. Going once, going twice. All right, Hiram. And it's interesting that for even Hebrew speakers, that they'll notice that instead of it being spelled as you would expect with the letter H, H-I-R-M, it's not. It's spelled with a C, C-H. So C-H-I-R-M. And so, because if you read the story about Hiram, either Hiram of Tyre, the Phoenician, or Hiram of Biff, it spells it this way, and it's pronounced Hiram. And so it really is a C and an R. So anyway, just another interesting data point. And then finally, the fraternity should remain secret for 100 years. So if the first manifesto appears in Europe in 1604, and the last one around 1617, what happened 100 years after 1617, right? The formation of these five lodges, or was it four lodges, they came together and at the, what was it, the Goose and Gridiron, and they became the moderns and the ancients came together and formed the United Grand Lodge of England, 1717. 100 years, pretty much to the day, after this last manifesto appeared in Europe, and then all of a sudden, as quickly as they came, all of a sudden they disappeared, and nobody sees these Rosicrucians. They all just went underground, much like they say the Templars did. And so, but interesting timing that the last manifesto is exactly 100 years, more or less, before the formation of the United Grand Lodge of England on earlier it was over by St. Paul's Cathedral, but now obviously on Great Queen Street. And Great Queen is just more code. The Great Queen has also been called Our Lady, and Our Lady in French is Notre Dame, Notre Dame, right? Or in Latin, Nostradamus. So there's codes after codes after codes, and this is only going to briefly touch on a few topics in order to make the point about the astronomical and astrological origins of the fraternity of the Rosy Cross, but certainly lots here for exploration if you're interested. And if we look at the astrology of the UGLE, and this is analysis that was done by my buddy Jamie Paul Lamb, that, I mean, it was founded on the 24th of June, the feast of St. John the Baptist. I mean, there was right next to a summer solstice. It was I think, corn, wine, and oil at high 12, beating glory of the day. What else did he say? The day of the week was Thursday, which is ruled, Thor's day, as my buddy Drew that's on knows. He always wears like blue or purple that day. But is ruled by Jupiter the king, which is associated with our Solomon. The sun was conjunct Jupiter at the midheaven, which was Cazimi, and all sorts of other stuff. I mean, there was just the astrology of the moment shows any learned astrologer or astronomer that they didn't just, pick this moment by happenstance. It's what's called electional astrology. From the time of the very first astrologers, I mean, that was pretty much the astrologer's role. When should we attack our neighbor? When should we launch the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria? When should we found a city? I mean, one of the greatest of elections of all time was supposed to be the founding of the city of Baghdad, and the astrologers, to this day, they say it's one of the most beautiful and mathematically precise elections in history, finding the best time within a window. I mean, we're not going to say, that the, ships or our soldiers should wait forever, but it's, hey, the king wants to know within a couple week period, when should we, start our campaign against our neighbor. And so the electional part of astrology says that you would look through the charts and you'd say, for the greatest chance of success, we should start off on this at this time. And the astrology of the UGLE's founding shows that astrologers were heavily involved. And when we look at the guys, Desaguliers and others that were involved in the founding, that were members of both Royal Society and the Kabbalah Club, we know that they were astrologers and Kabbalists and alchemists. And here in Robert Hewitt Brown's book, he puts it this way: Freemasonry is a system of science as well as morality, veiled in an astronomical allegory and illustrated by astronomical symbols. And this is a great book, founded on an even better book, but highly recommend this. And but it's just making more and more the point that Freemasonry, the reason why the U.S. and Freemasonry, right? The U.S. is essentially the first Masonic country because our majority of our founding fathers were Masons. In the symbolism here, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, the symbolism is all there for a reason. Again, like Cygnus, the swan could be portrayed as the pelican. Well, the double-headed eagle could be a single-headed eagle. It could be a phoenix. Regardless, you see the symbolism from the original wings of God, or what we call the Holy Spirit, we'll just say, is here in the Rosicrucian plate. But we find that same symbolism is throughout Freemasonry and our nation as a whole. And by the way, Our Lady, Nostradamus, or the Great Queen, another way of saying that is the District of Columbia, because Columbia was the Venusian goddess. So we were named after the Venusian goddess. And I have a whole presentation on the astrology of the founding of the District of Columbia. But maybe the last thing I'll say on that, an interesting tidbit, is that before we were the District of Columbia, and it was donated by a guy called Francis Pope, much like Pope Francis, the land was called Rome, Maryland. And then the District of Columbia became in between the Virginia, and Maryland, the Virgin Mary. So in 1610, we get this quote, but as when the heavens looks on us with new eyes, those new stars every artist exercise, what place they should assign to them, they doubt, argue and agree not till those stars go out. So the world studied whose this piece should be, till she can be nobody else, nor she. So they're talking about those stars. I mean, again, they were those stars that showed up in 1572, 1600, and 1604 were really the talk of the town, and the artists and the writers and the mathematici, the astrologers, they were all talking about this, and the Rosicrucians were saying that they were making predictions based on them. And I think this is the last one. And from the Confessio, we speak unto you by parables, but would willingly bring you to the right, simple, easy, and an ingenious exposition, understanding, declaration, and knowledge of all secrets. So much like Christ said, I speak to you in parables, that's essentially what the Rosicrucians are saying here. Like, we'd gladly speak to you simply and plainly, but it's just not possible because you're not learned yet. So anyway, with that, I will stop sharing and see if there is any questions, if I can see how to stop sharing.